Hello everybody, welcome back to a new episode of Translating Love with me, Woifi.
And Dani.
This is a new episode in this new year.
Oh, wait, it's a new episode?
It's the second episode of 2021, and I can't believe that we are already this far into the future without having flying cars.
Everyone predicted that we would have them.
They
were all wrong.
They were all wrong. I mean, they predicted that we would have them in 2000, but they were all wrong. Yeah, we are happy to be back with a new episode. It's the third time.
Wait, is it a new episode?
It's the third time. It's a new episode, so that's the fourth time. But yeah, it's 2021, and of course, we are still going strong with the podcast, and we hope that you are still enjoying it. If not, send complaints into our... just write a complaint and throw it away. We will get it that way.
There's basically a teleportation device in your garbage can that only comes to us, but only with complaints. So you can't just throw like banana peels in there or something. We won't get those.
Not only complaints. So if you have a complaint, just throw it in there and we get it.
No, but really, if there are things that you would like to see or I guess hear on the podcast, you can always send us that. But we'll get into that later.
Right.
For now, let's just welcome our very special guests onto the podcast. I have known these lovely human beings for a very, very long time, since we were, 11 or 12.
And what is the topic?
And the topic today is about gender pronouns and gender identity. And the reason that I wanted to do this topic is because, again, we are a relationship podcast, but not specifically for couples, but also just the human relationship. And I think it's really important to I don't know.
It's also a super interesting topic.
It is an
interesting
topic.
Educate yourself on.
And it's important to learn these things and to be open to how other people identify themselves.
Right.
So.
Let's jump in.
So on the phone, we have Leslie and Bradley, and they are actually siblings, and I have known them a super, super long time. I mean, I think probably... I don't know, Leslie, if you remember what year it was, but I think 2005 is when we met.
Probably before that.
Probably. I mean, it was in middle school for sure, and I think 8th grade is when we got to know each other better, but I feel like we knew each other before that.
Well, because we were in German before that in 7th grade.
Ah, true.
So probably 2003, 3 or 4.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So that's a long time. We've known each other a really long time.
Yeah.
I met Leslie the first time in the 80s. That was a wild time.
The
80s. Yeah, Wolfgang and I go way back.
Yeah. How are you guys?
Pretty good.
We're good. We're doing okay.
Good.
Having our morning coffee.
Yeah, it's like 5 o'clock here, like p.m., so we're past the morning coffee.
Yep. Just a little bit. Just a little.
I don't know. I drink my coffee all day, so...
That's true.
I have my 5 p.m. coffee as well.
Especially when we're home with our parents, because our dad makes coffee, and he just started drinking coffee a couple years ago, and so he makes it very weak.
Oh.
So we kind of drink it all day.
I see.
But we are very grateful. Dad, if you're listening, we're very grateful that you make us coffee every day. That's not a dig at you.
It's too weak, but we're still very grateful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. We have many, many coffee drinking years on you to build up our tolerance.
Right.
So.
Right. You build up the tolerance, yeah.
So for the listeners, we have Leslie and Bradley on the podcast because I, myself at least, and I'm assuming my husband, either of us not really know that much about gender pronouns, gender identity terms. And I think especially now it's becoming more of I would say a duty that we all, and just a way as human beings to respect each other, to be respectful exactly of those pronouns and gender identities. And so I think it's important to educate ourselves. And I asked you two to join the podcast because you know way more than I do. And I thought that you could give us a little schooling on the whole thing. And I want to preface this episode by apologizing in advance for anything ignorant I may say. And if I do say something wrong, please correct me, because that's how we learn.
Yeah. Well, and, and that's really the important thing, is being open to learning. Like, no one's going to be completely right 100% of the time, especially as you're kind of just starting to learn. And so, the important thing is just being open to learning and being open to being corrected, like you just said you are. So that's great.
So I guess the first thing that we would maybe just kind of dive into a little is your own personal pronouns, what they are for each of you, and maybe just like a brief background story of you as a person also for each of you, just who you are and all of that.
Right.
Right. Leslie, you want to go first?
Oh, just a brief history of me as a person. Sure. Well, I'm Leslie. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I do identify as a cis woman. We'll probably do a quick glossary a little later. But so history of me as a person. Grew up in the Milwaukee area in Wisconsin in the U.S. Got a degree in English and minors in German and music. Music was always a thing in my family, pretty much everyone in my family. And that was also, Danielle, how you and I connected a lot of the time. So that was always a thing. When I graduated, I taught for a couple years, got very burnt out, and left teaching. And now I work in the legal department for a major liquor company. And I do a lot of theater in my free time, which was a love that I had always. And kind of rediscovered after I graduated college. And so that is really where my heart is. I came out as queer near the end of my college career. And that has meant kind of different things to me since then. It kind of morphs and changes. And I haven't always used the word queer, but that is my chosen term these days. So that's where I'll leave it for now, I think. I can go into more detail later.
That's a good summation.
I think so too.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll go. My name's Bradley. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. So I am a non-binary human being. Another term that I sometimes use is genderqueer. We can kind of, again, go back. We'll backtrack and do sort of a glossary of terms at some point. But so I also grew up in the Milwaukee area, same as Leslie, because we're siblings. And I moved to Chicago. We both live in Chicago now. I moved there for college. I went to college for musical theater, was my major. And I graduated with a BFA. That's a Bachelor of Fine Arts. And yes, I've lived in Chicago ever since, doing the actor thing. I do have a day job too, which, we don't love, but, especially during the pandemic, I feel like, the day job is much more of my life than it usually is, because theater doesn't really exist right now. But, that's what's going on with me. I came out as queer in high school. I think it was probably, that would have been my junior year when I first started coming out to like various individuals, and then my senior year when I was like fully out. And similar to Leslie, I haven't always used the term queer. I've cycled through several different terms, but that's kind of where I've landed. For very similar reasons as Leslie. And I came out as non-binary about a year ago, actually. So that's, still, I guess, in the grand scheme, that is still relatively new. I've had, I first started encountering those terms, and friends that I know who are non-binary probably within the past 5 years. So it's still, no one should, if you're hearing those terms for the first time, you shouldn't feel badly about that. It's still very new to a lot of people. Being genderqueer, a lot of those concepts have existed for a long time, but the terminology we're using today is very new. Is there anything else important that I missed?
I don't think so.
Just about me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, all I took away from that is that I forgot to mention that I moved to Chicago.
Oh!
Because I'm a very selfish listener.
There's a little follow-up question.
Mm-hmm.
Like, before you came out or when you came out, how did you know, or how... I don't know how to better ask the question, but how did you know that the assumed pronouns were not how you wanted to be identified with or go with?
Sure. Well,
like the assumed he, he, him, she, her.
Yeah, that's a good opportunity to introduce the terminology. So those would be my assigned pronouns at birth. So the two terms you see a lot would be, some people pronounce them fully and some people just say the letters. But so it's AFAB and AMAB, or AFAB and AMAB. So that'd be assigned female at birth and assigned male at birth. So I was assigned male at birth, so people used he, him for me for almost my whole life. So that's an interesting question. It's different than when I came out as queer, because I feel like a lot of people, and everyone's experience is different, but I feel like coming out as queer was very much like something that I knew, that you just kind of like, you just know. It's something that is very, biological. It's just something that happens and you just know. But for gender is a little different because, different than biological sex, gender is kind of a societal construct. Mm-hmm. And so, it's interesting because I grew up not really knowing that being anything other than male or female was an option, so it's not really something that super occurred to me until I started seeing more people who were not conforming to gender and starting to openly identify in certain ways and use these terms. So for me, that kind of light was ignited when friends of mine started to come out as non-binary and start to use that language. So that was, probably, I don't know the exact dates, but, within the past 5 years was when that sort of became on my radar. And then the second part of this answer, I guess, would just be, sometimes you don't know if something fits until you try it, and that was kind of when I first started using they, them. I used it in addition to he, him. So I didn't completely switch. I just started using both. There are a lot of people out there who use multiple pronouns. And so, that was kind of an experimental thing, just to see, because, I wasn't sure. It was like, okay, am I going to like this a lot and ultimately switch to just using they, them, which is what happened. Or maybe, you try it and it doesn't work and you go back, or you find something new. It's important, I think, to destigmatize, taking time to make that choice. Because, it's sort of like, if you've ever tried to change your name, or even for me, I think growing up, switching back and forth between Bradley and Brad, it's kind of you never really know if something like that fits until you start to hear people refer to you that way, and it's, and it's in that regard, and that by that example, it's totally normal and acceptable for someone to be like, I'd rather be called this, and so it's thinking about it that way is important, because, how could you know if being referred to a certain way is going to feel right until you experience it? At least that was my experience.
Yeah, I think that's a really good analogy to put out there with the whole name, because I think everybody can relate to either having a nickname or going by their full name, and which they prefer. And it's just kind of a natural preference of, oh, this feels right, or, oh, this doesn't feel right, I don't like that. I think that's a really good way to look at it.
Yeah, it's helpful, because I think a lot of people struggle when people they know really well change their pronouns or change, something like that. But it's just, it's just the same as if someone decides they want to go by a different name or a different nickname, it's just an adjustment. Or like with pronouns too, it's like it's very easy for people if you like meet someone's dog and you use the wrong pronoun and someone's like, oh, actually she's a she. It's like people make that switch immediately and it's not an issue at all, so it's like people have the capability to do it, but there can be some resistance sometimes.
Well, and also what I will say is, the brain is a muscle. Mm-hmm. So even if you are completely on board when someone tells you their pronouns, if you have many years of mental practice using different pronouns, it's going to take time and it's going to take practice and building up that new muscle memory. Mm-hmm. So, in terms of people that I have used pronouns for in my life, I've used them for Bradley the longest. And so that's, I think I used the wrong pronouns yesterday.
Right.
And so it takes time, even when you are fully on board and fully respectful. Like there are going to be mistakes. Yeah. No one is going to be able to make the switch 100% immediately.
Yeah, it does.
It takes time.
It takes practice, and it's harder the longer you've known the person. Yeah, because like you said, it's muscle memory. And I think most non-binary and trans people would agree with what I'm about to say, and that the person who misgenders me the most often is probably myself. Even just like in my brain, when I'm thinking, it's like, because it's just habitual, it's a habit that has to be broken, and it happens less and less to me, but yeah. And to kind of go with what Leslie's saying, it's like the people I tend to give the most grace for, like when they slip up, are my family, and friends who've known me for a really long time, because it's hard. It takes practice, whereas people tend to not have as much of an issue when they meet me and I'm introduced with those pronouns, but when they do, it is that much more, I don't want to say, well, maybe I will say insulting. I mean, it's just kind of a basic respect thing. It's like if you meet someone for the first time and they never remember your name, it's like that. It's if they constantly call you by the wrong name, even if you don't know them very well, it's like, it's still just like it just shows a slight lack of respect being shown. The practice thing, it takes time. And I think some people tend to, kind of like freeze up and like, cause they're so afraid of being wrong. And you just have to do it, and, one of the things I've seen is like, anytime you misgender someone, just like practice it 3 times in your head, just like using their pronouns in a sentence. I think I've always liked that.
Yeah. If you decide you want to start weightlifting, you don't immediately try to bench press 500 pounds. Mm. You start with smaller weights and do it a bunch, and then eventually you work your way up. So, start with doing it right one time, and then practice. You'll probably mess up 4 times, and then you constantly work up. You constantly try to improve. There's no use in, beating yourself up because you can't bench press the 500 pounds immediately. You don't have the practice. You don't have those developed muscles. So give yourself patience and grace is what I would say.
Mm-hmm. Before going into, like, I wrote it down as a brief schooling of pronouns. A question that always comes back into my head, because every time we record the podcast, I try to, because it's a relationship podcast, so pronouns come up quite a bit. And I always try to throw in, if we say he, she, I always try to throw in they with it to try to include as many people as I can. But a question that always comes back up for me is how can you best address somebody or refer to somebody? So if they're not physically in the room with you, but say you're telling a story about them and you don't know their pronouns, is they, them an appropriate non-insulting way to do that, or is there a better way to approach it?
Yeah, I mean, I think you just gave us a perfect example. You said if you're referring to them, that's in human nature. That's already in the English language to use them when you don't know someone's pronouns. And that's a thing I always bring up when people bring up the point that it's quote unquote grammatically incorrect to use the singular they, because it's just not. We use it all the time. If you find someone's wallet on the street, you're going to think to yourself, oh no, someone lost their wallet. I hope they find it. That's just, it's already there. It's just making the switch to using it when someone prefers that, as opposed to only when you don't know their pronouns. But yeah, so I would say using singular they is always a great choice when you don't know someone's pronouns. And
or
then
if you're referring to someone indefinite. So in the context of this podcast, if you're talking about, your partner kind of in general, you can say like, yo, your partner, whoever they are, like that also works. If you're not talking about a specific human being, but kind of just talking about a hypothetical person, I think it also works. Yeah. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that I was done with my point. But yeah, so I think that's definitely the right choice.
And in terms of for me, I've gotten better at not beating myself up about it, but in terms of making mistakes, because I'm the type of person who is a perfectionist. And so if it doesn't matter what it is, if I mess up something, I either feel stupid or I feel, depending on the situation, I might feel ashamed or embarrassed. And in this case, I feel like I've gotten better at just accepting, okay, I'm going to make mistakes. I'm not always going to be right. But is there a way, because I've heard that, say, for example, I use somebody's pronouns wrong and I instantly correct myself without making a production of it. I've heard is a better way. You shouldn't be overly apologetic or make it into this big, massive thing, but rather just instantly correct it. Maybe, oh, sorry, I meant they, or oh, sorry, I meant, Is there anything else you can say to that in terms of making mistakes and how to correct them? Yeah,
I think you're exactly right. Just to expand on that, it's just not exactly what you said, not making a big production of it. For trans and non-binary people, being misgendered can be a very difficult and uncomfortable situation to be in, obviously, and it can be very triggering for some people. So making that moment as short and quick as possible is really helpful, just a quick, if someone corrects you, a quick thank you is always really helpful. I think thank you is even better than saying I'm sorry, because if you a small oh, sorry, I meant this, that's for me, I should say that this is my personal preference. I can't speak for the entire community as a whole, but in my opinion, a quick oh, sorry, I meant this, that I have no problem with that. But when it becomes a big apology, then suddenly this moment is now about me, the person who's been misgendered, making you saying it's okay, making you feel better in your mistake, which it doesn't mean that it's not, that it's a huge deal, but it's just the moment should not be about the person who's been misgendered now comforting the person who made the mistake and telling them it's okay, So I think, just a quick thank you and a correction is great. But that's my perspective as someone who's, been misgendered in that situation. I don't know if Leslie has something to add as someone on the other side of that interaction.
I think, I'll just echo what you already said, where if you become overly apologetic or make it a big to-do, suddenly you've made the situation about you and not about the person who has been wronged in this situation. And so and also I would add that I think a quick correction can also immediately let the other person know that you do know their correct pronouns, you respect their correct pronouns, and it was just a slip of the tongue. It makes that very, very clear very quickly versus I forgot your pronouns, I'm not bothering to correct it myself. I'm not making any effort, or
Yeah.
I just choose not to recognize your correct pronouns.
Right. Yeah, it shows, it demonstrates that you're working on it, which is really what's most important.
Yeah.
Maybe, I mean, Danielle already said it. Maybe like if give us a brief schooling or a brief overview of the pronouns.
Like the glossary of
At
terms.
least, it would be interesting to me because I'm like super new to the whole thing. I know like the community and I know some of the different I don't even know how to say it. Like,
You mean like gender identities?
yeah,
and-
right. Some
okay.
of them, but I think I mean it's expanding, and I think it's also growing in a way, in a good way, and so I'm still learning about the whole thing. So I think
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, I'm trying to organize my thoughts about like what the best sequence of
Yeah.
terms.
Well, let's start with one that I mentioned before that I said we'd circle back to.
Sure.
So let's start by circling back to that one. So when I introduced myself, I said that I identify as a cis woman. So cis is one of the prefixes that I think has really grown in usage, especially over the past maybe decade.
Yeah.
It existed before that, but it's really prominent right now. And so what you will see paired with cis a lot is trans. So we'll talk about those two.
And so when we say cis, that means cisgendered. It's
Yes.
shorthand for that.
Cisgendered.
And if you've never seen that word in print, it's spelled with a C, C-I-S.
Yes.
okay.
So cisgender or transgender. So we talked before, this is actually perfect, about assigned female at birth, assigned male at birth. So cisgender means that the gender that you identify with matches what you were assigned at birth. So I was assigned female at birth. That still feels good and correct to me, so I identify as a cis woman. If the gender that you identify with does not match the gender that you were assigned at birth, you may identify as transgender.
Yeah, and
Anything to
so...
add to that?
Right, yeah, so and the transgender umbrella includes non-binary identities as well. I think a lot of people... There are some misconceptions about trans and where it comes from, like... Because trans as a prefix, Leslie's the English major, but I think that just means different, or like on the other side of...
Like across. Like a change.
Yeah, so it doesn't necessarily mean that there's been a transition. You know, like some people think that being trans implies a medical, like a physical transition, which is not always the case. But so it really, just the way Leslie described it is good. That the transgender umbrella is anyone whose gender identity is different from what they were assigned. And so non-binary identities fit within that umbrella. Some people who are non-binary do also use the term trans. Some people don't. It's just a personal preference, what feels right to you. But those identities do nestle in that same umbrella. So
is
sorry,
is non-binary then? Is that if you don't? How would I say that? My understanding of non-binary is that you identify with both sides in some way. So you identify both with female and male, or you don't identify with either.
Right. So it can be that.
Okay.
That is one example of a non-binary identity. I would say would be someone who identifies with both male and female in certain ways or certain levels. But all that it implies is that, if the gender binary is this idea that gender can only be male or female, a non-binary person is just someone whose gender identity doesn't fall exclusively to one side. So it might mean you identify with both equally. It might be you identify with both in different percentages. It might be you identify with neither. It might be you identify with those and something else. It's kind of, it is the world of non-binary identities is very vast. And that's kind of the point, right? The idea that it's not as simple as just A or B, Right. And so for me, it was kind of like, I don't need to exclusively like reject these things that were a part of my maleness. But it's just that is not sufficient in summarizing what my gender identity is, and so it's like, if it's not even sufficient to just call it a spectrum, because I don't think gender is linear. I think it's a vast, chart of...
It's a scatter plot.
Yeah, it's a scatter plot. That's good. But yeah, so there are a lot of people, and there are other gender identities that kind of are covered within there as well. I mean, there's a term called agender. So that would be, someone who doesn't really identify with any gender at all. Similar to if you've ever heard of someone being asexual, it's just, the same concept, but instead of sexual orientation, we're talking about gender identity. Another term is genderqueer. A lot of people use that interchangeably with non-binary. It's something that I do as well. And that's just kind of a personal preference. I'm not even, because I feel they both apply to me. So I'm not even quite sure how to summarize the difference between those two. But, but yeah, it's maybe that difference would be different for everyone. When we're talking about labels and terminology like that, it kind of just depends on what it means to you and what feels right. Let's see. I'm trying to think of anything else that I can say about non-binary identities. I mean, do you have any other questions that arose from that?
Would gender fluid mix into that umbrella as well?
Yeah, that's a great one. Gender fluid would also fit in that umbrella. So I would say gender fluid is a little different. Is that more focuses on the idea that gender isn't fixed? That your gender can feel differently to you based on the situation, based on the day, and that's definitely something that I understand and identify with a little bit too, but it's not so much the label that I choose to use, whereas other people, that might be the one that really jives with them. For me, non-binary just really hit home, because I just really, just that whole idea that it's not a binary, that really made sense to me. So that's the term that I use most often. But yeah, I think a lot of people in that umbrella use multiple terms.
And on that point, to kind of tie together everything that we've talked about so far, with kind of figuring out what works for you and what feels good for you, and the meanings might differ from person to person, to tie that back into pronouns, not all non-binary people use they them pronouns. You don't that's not a requirement of being non-binary. Some continue to use the pronouns they were assigned at birth, but still identify as non-binary, and that's totally fine. And like Bradley mentioned before, some people use multiple different pronouns, and that's also fine. That's so when you find out that someone identifies as non-binary, you don't have to assume that they use they them pronouns. It may be good to use as a default until you learn their pronouns, but they may not use they them pronouns.
Yeah. And the best way to find out is just to ask. Any trans or non-binary person is going to be delighted to be asked what their pronouns are. Because it shows that you're safe, that you get it, and that, you'll do your best to respect it. But yeah, some people use multiple pronouns. Like one of my roommates, Deanna Lease, uses they, he, and she all interchangeably. And it's I think for some people, kind of embracing that ambiguity is part of what, makes sense to them. It can be very exciting to switch it up, and that's part of that fluidity. There are also a myriad of other pronouns out there that are not used as often, but are becoming more popular. And I'm sure there will continue to be more. I mean, I know a couple people who use pronouns Z and Zir.
I do too.
Which, yeah. And that's, even for me, that's something that I have to practice. Oftentimes when I refer to Zir, like right now, I have to think about it for a second, and especially, for terms like that, those are not, even more so than using the singular they, those are words that aren't a part of your normal lexicon. Right. So that takes a lot of time and thought, I think, to be able to use correctly. Others that I know of, I've heard here. Oh, I know there are others, but so the point being, there's a vast array of pronouns, and even if someone wants you to refer to them with something that you've never heard of and that maybe sounds ridiculous to you, why not use it?
Yeah.
People are going to continue to come up with new pronouns that feel right to them, and that's just a part of how language evolves.
Yeah, and it will take practice.
I just want to say, I really like the idea of stripping away those two things that basically, I don't know, has been around for I don't know how many years, that we are either or either, and there's nothing in between, there's nothing else. And I like the idea of breaking up that really, I don't know, I would say tight belief and construct of gender, and opening it up. And I think it's at least from my perspective, I think it's really good for some people, because feeling so, I don't know, wrong in a way, in a world where there's only male and female, can be really hard on you. And I mean, we have seen that. We have read about stories where they killed themselves or tried to harm themselves because they never felt right. They never felt like accepted, or they felt like there's something wrong with them, So I like the idea of opening that up, and also making it normal, making it a new way of just I don't know, communicating with each other and respecting who you are in that way.
Yeah, it is very important. And I mean, and it's also, there's in many ways that construct, that binary, has been around forever, but also, if you look at a lot of cultures around the world, there are a lot of cultures, mostly indigenous cultures, that recognize more than two genders. I think the really stringent gender binary is a very colonialist construct. Like, just for example, off the top of my head, I mean, the Native American community has an identity called Two-Spirit. And I don't want to say too much about it because I'm truthfully not incredibly educated on it myself. But I know the basic idea, they have this role in their society of this person who, occupies both genders, and it's like an honored, sacred position in the community. And so I think, there are a lot of cultures that have recognized genders like that throughout history. And, in the way that colonialism does, it stamps it out, But so it's simultaneously something that we have to fight against because it's been around forever, and it's also the gender identities outside of male and female have also existed forever. It's not new to this era, even if we have a lot of new terms.
Another question I had was about, again, this might sound stupid, but the appropriateness of, I think it's very appropriate to ask people what their pronouns are. But how is that then with gender identity? Is it appropriate to ask somebody how they identify, or is that something that's more of that you give out yourself as information if you feel you want people to know?
Yeah, I think that is, a case-by-case basis, I think pronouns are the type of thing, like pronouns are not, I mean, they are personal in some ways, it's a part of your identity, but they're also kind of impersonal, that's kind of a professional thing as well, how you want to be referred to by others, it's kind of...
right, it's just so like we compared it to a name earlier.
Yeah, it's a very appropriate thing to ask someone you've just met what their pronouns are if they haven't given them to you. Whereas gender identity is a little bit more of a personal thing. I would say that's more akin to asking someone what their sexual orientation is. It's like, depending on the situation, that would be totally appropriate. And in some situations, it would not be very appropriate. And it's like, if that person offers up that information, sure. I would say on a case-by-case basis, what feels right. Yeah, I'm not sure where that thought was going.
I'll add one thing to that, because I know sometimes, especially if you're meeting someone for the first time and you're wanting to use the correct pronouns for them, but you don't want to put them on the spot or force them to reveal something to you that they're not comfortable revealing. One easy way around that is just when you introduce yourself to state your own pronouns. So
that's a great.
Yeah.
That's actually
So
a really
hi,
good
my name
distinction.
is Leslie. My pronouns are she and her. It's nice to meet you. And then they can choose to either disclose or not. You aren't, and you've already made yourself vulnerable in a sense.
Yeah, that's no. I think that is a really good distinction, to just offer up your own rather than specifically
somebody
ask
for
them
theirs,
for theirs. Because that is a thing. When someone introduces themselves to me with their own pronouns, that immediately tells me that they get it, that they're a safe person to tell this to. Whereas, and there's a lot of situations if I'm meeting someone, like. If I'm meeting someone, I mean, I was gonna say like at a party, but what are parties? I don't really meet new people very often anymore because of the pandemic. But there are a lot of situations where it's just not worth it to bring up my pronouns, because this is someone that I'm not really gonna have a lasting relationship with. I'm probably only gonna talk to them for a couple minutes and then leave, and I don't know if they are familiar with what being non-binary means, or they, them pronouns. I don't know if this is going to turn into me having to have this big discussion and explain it to them and, do that type of labor, and so like, there's a lot of times where trans and non-binary people will just kind of decide that it's sort of not worth it and to just kind of glaze past it. And so if someone offers up their own pronouns, that tells me that this is a safe place to bring it up, and so thank you, Leslie. That is a very good distinction.
And another
I
very
agree.
easy,
That's great.
Yeah, and another very easy thing to do. My workplace is encouraging everyone to do this. Is in your personal email or professional email, to include your pronouns in like your email signature, because even if you don't have practice, offering your pronouns when you introduce in person, having it down there is still, if anyone whose pronouns are not obvious and who are misgendered all the time see that in your email signature, that just shows them that you are thinking about it, you care, and that you are safe. And it can be affirming even just to see it in an email signature. And that's such an easy change to make. Right.
Well, and also, just it's that practice. It's muscle memory. The more often people see people's pronouns displayed, the more comfortable you'll be not assuming someone's pronouns before they've told them to you. You know what I mean? And you get more comfortable giving your own and finding out what people's pronouns are. And
it also becomes visible because other people can see it too. So then other people who may not be thinking about it as deeply or not aware of it at all will see it. And so it will become normalized for them too.
Yeah. Or I have my pronouns in my email signature, and I've had people kind of be like, oh, what's that? Why is that there? And it does, it gives you an opportunity to educate those people. And I think especially that's important as a cisgender person, for you to take the time when you have the opportunity to educate people, so it takes that off the shoulders of trans people.
I agree.
Yeah, I purposefully started doing that. I'm cisgender, and I put my pronouns in my Instagram bio. And even just putting it in my Instagram bio, people have responded to it. Oh, why do you have that there? And then I can... and I always say I'm not as educated myself, but I'm learning. And I think that also inspires other people to be like, oh, I never really thought about that. And I could start thinking about that more now too.
Yeah.
And I think
that's great.
I had read that cisgender people should be doing things like that to make it visible, to show that they're an ally, and to show that they're trying, and they're trying to learn, and they're trying to educate themselves.
That's huge.
there's a follow-up question, or it's somehow related to that. Because some people are just not willing to educate themselves, or I don't know, seem to hang on to those old beliefs that there are only two
Or
genders,
because it's easier for them.
or because it's whatever. But what do you think is that drives them to are just not wanting them to educate, or what maybe can we do? I mean, we already said like the just displaying it openly in like an email handle or like Instagram, wherever. But what is something else we can do actively to maybe try to educate people, to put it out there?
Sure. Okay, well, so there's two parts to that question. So the first part would be, what do we think drives people to have such resistance towards these concepts? So, I mean, that's, that's a very deep question. I mean, I think, in my opinion, because there's, people have a lot of resistance and people have a lot of anger. And there's a lot of violence, demonstrated towards trans and non-binary people all over the world. And I think the root of that is not to say that everyone is, non-binary. That's not what I'm saying. But like, there's this element of, if you're looking at someone who is living outside of this social construct that you have been taught your whole life that you have to live within, you that's like, oh, this person is not obeying that, and that's something that I am obeying. Like if I'm a man who's lived my whole life being told I had to dress a certain way, and then I see someone who I perceive as a man wearing, high heels or makeup, that is, I've been told my whole life that that's not an option for me, and I think that that's a little bit of where that like guttural reaction comes from. But I mean, it's going to be different for everyone.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of, I think not exclusively, but I think there's always a heavy pressure on, young men and boys to not display any femininity, to the point that maybe there would be fear of physical harm if they do. And so I think that fear is so strong and so ingrained that I think it may just be, even just seeing someone else do it gives that like adrenaline, panic, fight or flight reaction in you, because you've been taught that is something that is a danger to you.
Yeah, it calls into question, this rule that you've been living by your whole life, that, and suddenly you're seeing someone else and they're, for lack of a better term, they're breaking the rules, And so, I think that's where a lot of that visceral emotion comes from people who are resistant and or angry about things like this.
I think also, questioning can be very scary. Yeah. And I think some people who just have never questioned, have never had to question, when they see other people living in a way that they've never considered, that may open up a door for them to question themselves, and that can also feel very scary. And a lot of people, I think, don't want to do that. It's a little bit of, I've worked very hard to live this life, and I'm comfortable living this life. I don't want to have to question it and worry that I've made a mistake living my life this way.
Yeah. It's that kind of reminds me of, this is related. It reminds me of something that Leslie, you shared on Facebook today or yesterday that was kind of like, it would be really amazing for everyone, regardless of their gender identity, specifically for cis people, to think through certain questions that trans people have automatically done. And it's like, it doesn't mean everyone's going to have this big revelation, but it's like, okay, if you're a cis man, think about, what is it about being a man that you like? What is it that you like? What is it that you don't like about being a man? How does your gender match who you feel like you are inside, and are there any ways in which it doesn't match, and like what makes you feel good and what doesn't, because that you can pick and choose the parts of being your gender that feel right to you, that's part of what gender is. It's your identity, and it's a social construct. It's like this idea that your biological sex is linked to who you're supposed to be and how you're supposed to act and how you're supposed to appear. That's something that we created, and so it can be whatever you want it to be.
I think that's something a lot of people forget.
If I could speak about my own experience for a second.
Yeah.
Because I have, so my presentation has always been, somewhere in the middle. I've never felt super confident presenting in a hyper feminine way. So I've always kind of leaned more towards masculine presentation or androgynous presentation. And so that led me at a certain point to question my gender. But in asking some of these similar questions, like one of the things that can also be done in this is just expanding the existing binary. So breaking out of it is of course important, but also, because I don't want to dress feminine, that doesn't mean that I can't possibly be a woman.
Right.
You can be a woman, and that can mean all sorts of different things. And so that's where I landed, where being a woman never felt wrong to me. I was questioning because I was choosing a different kind of presentation than what was expected of me as a woman.
Yeah.
But I had to ask those questions in order to land there.
Right.
And so I think, that's just to punctuate the point that cis people should also ask these questions of themselves, because it can really lead to a deeper understanding of you and your identity.
Yeah. Well, and you also just made me think of like an interesting thing that's like, in terms of specifically the question of your presentation, like the clothes you wear, how you appear. Women are typically afforded a lot more grace and options.
Completely.
Like we kind of as a society, we have sort of we got past the hurdle of women wearing pants, a while ago. Women can wear a lot more things, and you don't look at them and you necessarily question their gender identity. Or even just growing up, like you can be a tomboy. That's totally something that society is prepared to understand, whereas for men and for boys it's very stringent. There are not a lot of options. The idea of a man, or of a young boy like wearing something that wasn't from their section of the store is not something that society is usually very welcoming towards. I just think that's very interesting because with gender issues, typically and historically, women do bear the brunt of the oppression. But specifically with expression, your physical appearance, it's very interesting that toxic masculinity really does have a heavy hand. Yeah. Especially today. It hasn't always. Makeup and high heels, those have been a part of the male lexicon in many eras. But right now, the social norm has not landed there.
Yeah.
But it's changing. I think the dial is slowly moving.
Yeah, to kind of go along with what Leslie was saying earlier, I've always felt feminine, and I've always felt like, so cis for myself, I've always felt like as if I matched the gender that I was born with. But I had a really hard time in high school, and I've been a lot this year especially been kind of exploring that a little bit, because in high school I had a lot of through high school, basically all of my school years, I always felt like I didn't really fit in with the feminine quote crowd because I developed really late. I didn't know how to use makeup, and I felt like you had to if you wanted to be a pretty woman. That's what we're taught in the media, and so I never really felt like I fit in. And this last year, especially with the pandemic and everything, I've kind of gone more into my femininity and tried to just find the things that felt right for me, and like what do I feel like feminine is? How do I feel the most beautiful to myself, completely outside of what the social norms might be that were placed into my head.
Yeah.
And so for me, the big thing this year was I completely stopped wearing makeup. I never put it on anymore. And for me, that feels like the most feminine ever, because I'm embracing who I am naturally. And it's the same with shaving. It's the same. I used to never leave the house if I didn't shave my legs, if I didn't shave my armpits, if I didn't have eyeliner on, I wouldn't leave the house. And this last summer, I was like, fuck it. I'm just not shaving. I would go to work with my shorts on and my hairy legs. And I'm like, I feel badass. Like, I feel super good. And I think that goes along with the thing that you posted, Leslie, was so lovely. And when I was reading it, I was like, that totally goes along with kind of my own exploration of what I did this year. And I think everybody can benefit from questioning those things, because you don't have to fit into the social norm to be feminine, to be masculine, to be in between, to be neither. You just find what's right for you and what makes you feel like the person that you are.
I agree. I mean, I think it's with everything, every concept or every construct that is man-made or made by society or other centuries ago. We should question. Not to say that everything's bad, but also not to say that everything's good. And I think by questioning those constructs, change can be a good thing. And if we look back just 45, 60 years, I mean, there's so many things that changed because we thought about them and we said, okay, maybe that's not the best thing, or maybe we should open up that thing for more people, or whatever it was. But I seen so many people lately that, I don't know, they just somehow fear change. They somehow are like, they're living in their bubbles and they try to prevent change. And with this pandemic, I mean, we all had to somehow change our lives and our social behaviors and everything. And I think it's, you can see people longing for that old life, or like, I want to go back to how the life was before the pandemic and so on. But I think, especially in a situation like this, it's the best way to embrace it and to see, okay, what can we as a society, and maybe what can I as a singular person do to change, to be like better, to, I don't know, I mean, in the whole sense, contribute in a more positive way to society. And I think that all goes along with being more open, being more aware, educating yourself and all that stuff. I think right now it's the best time to do that, I think.
That's a really lovely
I agree.
sentiment.
And like, so to go back to the second part of the question that you had asked, which was in addition... I totally
forgot about that.
No, me too. I'm like, okay, we're circling back. Like, what, other than putting pronouns in your email signature, what are ways that you can help as a cisgender person? I mean, I think the primary thing is just having conversations like we're having right now. You know, if you know any trans or non-binary people and you think, find out if they feel comfortable talking to you and pick their brain, and if they don't feel comfortable, then, or if you don't know any trans or non-binary people that you know of, seek out the information. The internet is very vast. There are a lot of things that you can find out. And I would say recognize that I think a lot of trans and non-binary people will feel very happy to be asked questions like these, but also just remember that it can be a lot of emotional labor to do so. And so don't go in assuming that they're going to take the time to educate you. That is... And
if they choose not to,
it's not an
don't
insult.
take it as a personal affront. It's not. It's it's them choosing.
Right.
Or just It's them realizing, do I have the capacity to handle this right now?
Yeah, and sometimes, it can be helpful. I think when as a person with some sort of privilege, when you're asking something from a marginalized group, this is actually something one of my professors in college told me, which is not in this context, but it was kind of like, before you ask the question, think to yourself, can I find this out very quickly through Google?
Yeah.
It's like, is this a Googleable question, or is this something else? And so like, if it's, if it's something you can find out pretty quickly by a quick internet search, maybe try that first. But yeah, just, look up videos of trans and non-binary people talking about their experience. Like, everyone is different. Just take in as much information as you can, and then have these conversations with other cisgender people. That's really the important thing, is just to bring awareness and to open up people's minds. Do you have anything else to say?
Also, just continuously be open to learning more. There is no woke finish line.
Yeah.
There's always more to learn, and things are constantly changing.
Right.
So even things that you learn now, in a few years, that may change.
Yeah,
that
who knows?
may not be
Maybe,
a thing anymore.
5-10 years from now, maybe, non-binary will be a term that we don't use anymore for X, Y, or Z reason. Maybe we'll find something new that's better, or we'll find a reason why, certain, like, language evolves, and so just be prepared for that. And also, I hope this goes without saying, but donate to organizations that support trans youth.
Right.
Because there's a lot of people who need help. I know, well, I guess Christmas just happened, but I know Trans Santa is a organization that was raising money in the past couple weeks. I'm sure they're still accepting money, but they were basically raising money to get supplies and things for trans youth for the holidays. So anything like that, just look out for ways that you can not only support with your mind, but also with your dollars, or your, what's the money in
Euros.
Austria? Euros. I guess I could have guessed that.
We don't want to take all of your time. I could probably talk to you both for hours. But
I agree.
I will just ask one more question, and that's just if you have advice for anyone who's out there struggling with their own identity and struggling to figure out how they identify, how they feel, and if they're maybe overwhelmed by all of the possibilities of where they could fit in. If you have any advice for anyone who might be listening who's in that place.
Ooh, I've got so much. How do I summarize? Do you have anything that's coming to you immediately?
Well, I guess I can offer some advice to people who are people who have people in their lives who may be using new pronouns, that they are trying to be supportive and loving of those people. And I guess my advice is just always come from a place of love. You are trying to do what is right for this other person.
Mm-hmm.
It's natural to have, defensive feelings, or to, think that things are hard and want to quit. That is natural. That is human nature. But always come from a place of love. If they are asking something of you that will make them feel good, you should want to do that for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so always come from a place of, I love this person. What will be the best for them in this situation?
Mm-hmm.
And if you do that, as long as you are trying, you will mess up. But continue to come back to that as your guiding principle. And I think that will help even through the mistakes and through the missteps, just to keep coming back to that.
That's really good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess my advice to anyone who's out there, questioning or struggling with their own identity and how they fit into this world and this community. I mean, yeah, I want to start by just saying that questioning and struggling with it are both okay, and they're part of the process. And just that there's no wrong answer. Wherever you land is right. And however you feel like you're who you want to be, that is beautiful, and that is what you're meant to do. And, trans and non-binary people are, we do something very remarkable and very honorable by doing this introspective work and, stripping away what society says we're supposed to be and digging deep down and finding who we think we are and just embracing that to the nth degree. And that's incredibly beautiful. And yeah, so if you're doing that work to break down those barriers within yourself, and you're going to find a really amazing self-actualization that not everyone finds in their life. So just know that the struggle is real, and it's okay, and it's actually a beautiful part of the process, and you will be better for it. I guess that would be what I want to impart.
That's very, very beautiful.
Thanks.
Yeah, so I guess with that, we will end it. And after we're done recording, you guys can send me maybe some links to some organizations that
Sure. Yeah,
people can
absolutely.
donate to, maybe some personal favorites of yours, and we'll link them then in the description of the podcast.
Great.
So anyone listening can use those links as a starting point. And yeah, I really, really, we both do. We really appreciate the time that you've spent teaching us.
Yeah.
I feel like I learned a lot, and I'm really, really grateful for the time and energy that you both spent doing this for us and for anyone who's listening. And I think it's really important that people try to absorb as much of the information that they can, so we can all have a better human relationship.
Yeah. And yeah, thank you so
Right.
much for inviting us. It really means a lot to be asked to talk about these things.
And for being vulnerable yourselves. It's hard to admit that you don't know things. I hate admitting that I don't know things. So thank you so much for being an example in that regard. It's super important to model that, and I really admire you guys.
Me too.
That's very sweet. Thank you.
It's our pleasure. It's our pleasure.
Great. Okay, well then we will say goodbye, and yeah. I don't know if you have something to
No.
add before we say goodbye.
I wish you the best day, and I hope we talk to you soon.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Same. Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
All right,
Bye.
bye.
That's it. That was a really, really lovely conversation, and I hope that some of you learned something.
I did.
I did too. And the way I think the ending was also super cool, where they just described in this really grounded and profound way what you can do to feel more yourself, to be more yourself, to find out who you truly are.
And there is no wrong answer. And I think that's
Right.
also just a lovely thought to have in the back of your mind, to
Right.
say there is no wrong answer, and there is no specific amount of time that you have to figure it out in. You take the time that you need, the time that feels right to you, and you'll find all of the answers that you need, because they're already there.
Right.
They're there inside of you, within you. You just need to let them come out.
I think it's just in the underline is just question things, and if they don't feel right to you, go into it again and see why they don't feel right to. And in the end, sure, it's a tedious process, and it can hurt and it can be painful, But I think in the end, you will be much happier. And I think that's all what matters.
Yeah.
Because we all live on this planet and we try to make it as best as possible until we die.
And we're also very big advocates for loving yourself. And
Right.
you have to be able to know who you are to fully love yourself. And that doesn't mean you have to know everything about yourself, because we're always changing, we're
Right.
always growing. But just to be in tune with who you are as a person and to love that person
Right.
is super important. So whatever that means for you. I hope that you find it. I hope that you discover all of the beautiful and unique things that make you who you are. And as my dad always says, you are loved, you are needed, and you matter.
Right. And if you like this podcast,
If you like this podcast, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. So in Google Podcasts or Apple or Spotify, wherever you listen. And like, if that's a possibility in your podcast app or whatever you use. We also love getting feedback. Reach out to us either at our Instagram at Translating Love Podcast, or you can leave us a voice message, which we also love, on anchor.fm/translating-love.
yeah.
Right?
And other than that, that's it for the second episode of this year.
That's it. We'll see you next time for another brand new episode of Translating Love.
Bye.
Bye!